I found out the truth at a party where I was not supposed to exist. It happened over the course of one evening. It involved my older brother. There were about 40 people in the room, and somehow his wife's family knew me, even though he had spent years acting like I was a stranger. At first I thought I was misunderstanding something. Then I started doing the quiet math in my head. None of it added up. I'll explain how it reached that point in a minute. To be honest, I never thought I would end up in that house at all. My brother and I grew up close in age, just under 3 years apart. We were not inseparable or anything like that, but we were in the same orbit, same schools, same neighborhood, same family routines. When he went off to university, I was still finishing my last year of college, and after that our lives started moving in different directions. Nothing dramatic, just distance. He married into what people politely call a well-connected family. That was the phrase he used the first time he mentioned them. Well-connected. He said it like it explained everything and nothing at the same time. I remember asking him what that actually meant, and he just laughed and said I would understand one day. I did not push it. For a while after the wedding, he stayed in touch the same way he always had. Short calls, occasional messages, birthday texts that arrived late but still counted. Then slowly things changed. He started dodging certain questions. If I asked about visiting, he would say the timing was not great. If I mentioned his wife's parents, he would answer in vague sentences that went nowhere. At first I assumed it was normal newly married distance. Then there were small moments that felt off. He stopped tagging me in family photos online. He would crop group pictures in a way that cut me out even when I knew I had been standing right next to him. When mutual relatives asked why I was not at certain gatherings, he would say I was busy or out of town. I usually heard about these explanations days later, from someone else. I told myself I was reading too much into it. One night, about 2 years after his wedding, I asked him directly. I tried to keep my voice light. I asked if I had done something wrong, or if there was a reason he seemed to keep me separate from that part of his life. There was a pause on the line that lasted just long enough to feel intentional. He said no. He said everything was fine. He said I was overthinking. That should have been the end of it. But something about the way he said it did not sit right. I did not accuse him. I did not argue. I just let it go, because pushing would have turned it into something bigger, and I did not have proof of anything. I also did not want to embarrass him or myself by making assumptions that could be wrong. So I stayed in my lane. The invitation came out of nowhere. He called me on a Tuesday evening and said there was a small celebration at his place that weekend. Not a big event, just people dropping by. He said I should come if I was free. He said it casually, like it was no big deal, but the fact that he invited me at all felt new. I asked who would be there. He hesitated again. Then he said mostly friends, some of his wife's relatives, nothing formal. He added that it might be a bit awkward, but only because people might not know me well. That line stuck with me. I almost did not go. I told myself I would show up, stay for an hour, say hello, and leave before things got uncomfortable. I did not want to create tension or force conversations that were not meant to happen. I just wanted to see him, remind myself that whatever distance existed was not permanent. When I arrived, the house was already full. Shoes lined the entryway. Voices layered over each other in the living room. Laughter from somewhere deeper in the house. It felt like one of those gatherings where everyone already knows where to stand. My brother greeted me. At the door. He looked relieved but also tense. He hugged me quickly, then stepped aside like he needed to get back to something else. His wife smiled politely and said hello. The way you greet someone you have been told about but do not really know. I remember thinking that was fair. For the first 20 minutes, no one paid much attention to me. I stood near the kitchen counter, holding a glass I did not really want, listening more than talking. People discussed travel plans, work projects, inside jokes that had clearly been built over time. Then a man across the room looked at me and froze. He tilted his head slightly, like he was trying to place my face. Then he smiled, walked over and said my name, not my brother's name, mine. I laughed awkwardly and asked if we had met before. He shook his head and said no, but he knew who I was. He said it like it was obvious, like it was strange that I would even ask. Before I could respond, a woman nearby joined in. She said my name too. She mentioned something specific about my work that I had never told my brother's wife or her family. Then another person chimed in, referencing a detail from my past that only someone who had been told stories about me would know. I remember looking around the room, suddenly very aware of how quiet it felt to me even though people were still talking. That was the moment the math stopped working. My brother had spent years acting like I was barely part of his life, yet here were people from his wife's side who seemed to know exactly who I was. I did not say anything right then. I smiled. I nodded. I answered questions carefully. But something shifted in me, and I could feel it settling in a way that was not going to undo itself. That was only the beginning. After that first exchange, people started circling back to me one by one. Not in a dramatic way. More like curiosity that had been waiting quietly and finally had permission to show itself. Someone asked how long I had been doing my job. Someone else mentioned a city I used to live in. A third person asked if I still kept in touch with an old family friend I had not thought about in years. Each question landed gently, but together they formed a pattern. They knew me, or at least, they knew a version of me that had been described to them in detail. I kept glancing toward my brother, half expecting him to jump in or redirect the conversation. He stayed on the other side of the room, talking to his wife's father, nodding too much, smiling too tightly. He did not look over once. That should have told me something. At one point, a woman about my age leaned against the counter next to me. She said she was my sister-in-law's cousin. She asked how often my brother and I saw each other growing up. I said fairly often, nothing unusual. She laughed softly and said that made sense, because he talked about me like we were always together. I paused. I asked what she meant. She shrugged and said he mentioned me a lot when he first started dating his wife. Stories from childhood. Things we did together. Arguments we had. Even small details, like how I used to correct him when he exaggerated something. She said it fondly. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. I thanked her and excused myself to refill my glass even though it was still mostly full. Standing alone for a moment, I tried to make sense of it. If he talked about me so openly back then, why had I slowly disappeared from the picture later? Why had I been kept at arm's length from this entire side of his life? Why did it feel like everyone knew me except the people I was supposedly being hidden from? I told myself there could be explanations. Maybe things changed after marriage. Maybe he assumed I preferred privacy. Maybe his wife misunderstood something and it snowballed quietly. None of those explanations fully worked, but they kept me from spiraling. I decided to find him. I waited for a natural break in his conversation and walked over. I did not accuse him. I did not even sound upset. I asked calmly whether people here knew me from him or from somewhere else. He blinked, just once. Quick, almost invisible. He said of course they knew me from him. He said he talked about his family all the time. He said I should not be surprised by that. I asked why he always told me it would be awkward to meet them then. He smiled in a way that felt practiced. He said awkward was the wrong word. He meant unfamiliar. He said it was not a big deal and I was reading too much into it again. That word landed heavier than he probably intended. Before I could respond, his wife joined us. She asked if everything was okay. Her tone was polite but guarded, like she sensed something but did not know what shape it had yet. I said everything was fine. That was true, in a technical sense. No one was yelling. No one was being rude. But there was a growing sense that I had been standing in the wrong version of a story for a long time. Later, someone made a toast. It was casual, no speeches, just a raised glass and a few words about family and support and how lucky everyone was to be together. When the word family came up, several people looked at me and smiled, not pointedly, not intentionally, but enough. I felt seen in a way that was confusing rather than comforting. As the evening went on, I noticed small details I might have ignored otherwise. Photos on the wall where my brother was present at events I had not been told about. Stories people shared that placed him in rooms I did not know he had been in. References to trips and holidays that had happened without a word to me. None of it was dramatic on its own. Together it felt deliberate. 8. At one point my sister-in-law's mother asked me if I still lived nearby. I said yes. She said she was surprised we had not met sooner. She said she had assumed I preferred to stay out of things. I asked what she meant. She hesitated, then said my brother had mentioned I valued independence and did not like being pulled into extended family situations. She said it with no judgment, just matter of fact. That was not true. I never said that. Not to him. Not to anyone. But suddenly it made a strange kind of sense. If he had framed my absence as a choice, then no one would question it. If he had painted me as someone who preferred distance, then my silence would look intentional instead of imposed. I did not confront him about it that night. I stayed until it felt socially acceptable to leave. I thanked the hosts. I said my goodbyes. Several people told me they were glad to finally meet me, like I had been a character off-screen for years. On the drive home I replayed the evening in fragments. The pauses, the looks, the way my brother avoided eye contact when certain topics came up. The way others filled in gaps without realizing there were gaps at all. I was not angry yet. I was something quieter than that. I was trying to understand when exactly I had been edited out, and why everyone else had been given a version of me that made my absence easier to explain. The next day, I did not call him. That surprised me. Normally, after something felt off between us, I would reach out just to clear the air. This time I needed space, not because I was angry, but because I did not trust myself to ask the right questions yet. Instead, I sat with what I knew. He had talked about me enough for his wife's family to recognize my name, my work, parts of my personality. He had also described me in a way that explained why I was not around, without ever saying I was unwelcome. That meant my absence was not accidental. It had been managed. That realization landed slowly. A few days later, my aunt called me. She had been at the party too, but we barely spoke that night. She said she wanted to check in because she sensed something was off. She did not push. She just asked how I was doing. I told her the truth. I said I was confused. She sighed, and then she said something that shifted the ground a little more. She said my brother had once asked her, years ago, whether it was necessary for his wife's family to meet everyone from his side. He had framed it as a cultural thing, a comfort thing. He said some families preferred a cleaner picture. My aunt asked him what that meant. He told her not everyone fits the image people expect. At the time, she did not think much of it. She assumed he meant distant relatives, complicated dynamics, nothing specific. Now hearing it again, I felt a strange chill. I asked her if he had ever mentioned me directly. She paused. Then she said no. That silence said more than a clear answer would have. I thanked her and ended the call. That night I pulled up old messages between my brother and me. Not to look for proof, but to remind myself of patterns. I noticed how often I had suggested meeting up with his wife's family, and how often he had redirected the conversation. I noticed how frequently he spoke in general terms instead of specifics when it came to that part of his life. It was subtle, consistent, easy to miss unless you were looking backward with new context. A week later he called me. He asked how I was. He said the party had been nice. He said people enjoyed meeting me. I waited. He did not mention the conversations I had overheard. He did not acknowledge the gap between how he spoke about me to them and how he spoke about them to me. I asked him directly why people there knew so much about me when he had spent years telling me it would be awkward for me to be around them. There it was. Calm. Clear. No accusation. He exhaled slowly. He said it was complicated. He said when he first started dating his wife, her family had strong opinions about background, status, presentation. He said he did not want unnecessary judgment falling on anyone. He said it was easier to talk about me than to introduce me. I asked what that meant. He hesitated again. Then he said sometimes stories are easier than people. That line hurt more than I expected. I asked if he thought I would embarrass him. He said no. He said it was not about embarrassment. He said it was about control. He explained that once people meet you, you cannot shape how they see you anymore. Before that, you can frame things, adjust context, smooth edges. I did not know what to say to that. He added that over time, the story he told about me became fixed, independent, private, not interested in extended family. And once that version existed, changing it would raise questions he did not want to answer. So he let it stand. I asked him why he invited me now. He said it was getting harder to maintain. People were asking more questions. He said it was easier to let me show up than to keep explaining why I did not. I sat with that in silence. I realized then that the invitation was not an olive branch. It was a release valve. I told him I needed time. He said he understood. He said he hoped I knew it was never meant to hurt me. I did not argue. I did not validate that either. AF. Till the call ended, I felt something settle. Not closure, not relief, clarity. I understood that my brother had not hidden me because of who I was. He had hidden me because of the version of himself he was trying to protect. And once I saw that, I could not unsee it. After that call, I changed how I moved around him. Not in a dramatic way. I still answered messages. I still showed up to family events when it made sense. But I stopped filling in gaps for him. I stopped explaining his absence or smoothing over things when people asked why we did not spend much time together. I let the silence exist. A few weeks later, his wife reached out to me directly. That alone told me something had shifted. She asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. Her message was polite, careful, like she was stepping onto unfamiliar ground. I said yes. We met on a weekday afternoon. Neutral place. Public enough to feel safe, quiet enough to talk. At first, we stayed on the surface. Work, weather, small observations. Then she paused and said she wanted to ask me something, but she did not know how to phrase it without sounding rude. I told her to say it anyway. She asked if I had ever felt like she was keeping distance from me on purpose. That question surprised me. I told her the truth. I said I had felt distance, but I always assumed it came from my brother, not her. I said I never knew how much she knew or what she had been told. She nodded slowly. She said when they were dating, my brother described me as someone who valued privacy and did not like being folded into new family structures. She said she took that at face value. She said she did not want to push. I asked if she ever questioned it. She said sometimes, but by the time she did, the story had been told so many times it felt awkward to challenge it. She said families settle into narratives faster than people realize. That sounded true. I did not ask her to defend herself. I did not ask her to apologize. I was not looking for that. I just needed to understand how the version of me that existed in that house had been built. Before we left, she said something quietly. She said meeting me made her realize how different it feels to know someone directly instead of through someone else's lens. I thanked her for saying that. After that, things did not magically fix themselves. My brother did not suddenly become more open. He did not start inviting me to everything or rewriting the past. But something important had changed. The version of me he had been managing was no longer the only one in circulation. People now had their own impressions. At the next family gathering on his wife's side, I noticed the difference. Conversations were easier, less tentative. No one treated me like a footnote. No one acted surprised that I existed. My brother watched from a distance. Not with anger, not with relief either, more like someone realizing a system they built no longer belonged to them. We never had a big confrontation about it. We never sat down and hashed out every decision he made. In a strange way, that felt honest. What happened was not the result of one bad moment. It was the result of years of small choices stacking quietly. You do not undo that with one conversation. What I did do was set boundaries. I stopped accepting vague explanations. If he invited me somewhere, I asked who would be there. If he avoided answering, I declined. Not to punish him, but to protect myself from being placed back into a controlled role. He noticed. Once he asked if I was pulling away on purpose. I told him no. I told him I was just showing up where I was fully welcome. He did not argue with that. Looking back, I think the hardest part was realizing that I had been easy to hide because I trusted him. I did not question his framing. I did not demand access. I assumed good intentions even when things felt off. That is not something I regret, but it is something I learned from Fahmy. Lies do not just drift apart by accident. Sometimes distance is designed, not out of cruelty but out of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of losing control, fear of having to answer questions you are not ready for. Understanding that did not excuse what he did. It just helped me stop internalizing it. I did not lose my brother that year. But I did lose the version of our relationship where I believed proximity was guaranteed. In its place, something more cautious formed. More honest. Less automatic. That felt like a fair trade. Not with an argument or a big moment, but with the absence of one. A few weeks after that coffee with my sister-in-law, life settled back into something that looked normal from the outside. Work, messages, family obligations. The difference was internal. I had stopped assuming things would correct themselves if I stayed patient. That was new for me. Before all this, I believed time smoothed things out. I believed that if you stayed reasonable and did not escalate, people would eventually meet you halfway. What I was learning was that silence can also become permission, and I had given plenty of that. The first real test came with a holiday dinner. My brother sent a message in the family group chat saying he and his wife were hosting something small. Just immediate relatives, he said. Nothing formal. I noticed how carefully the message was worded. Immediate relatives can mean many things depending on who is defining it. I asked him privately who exactly would be there. He replied with a list that included his wife's parents, her sister, and a couple I recognized from the party. People who now knew me as a person, not a story. I said okay. I would come. That pause before his response told me he had expected resistance. The dinner itself was uneventful, which in a strange way made it harder. No tension to point at, no obvious wrong behavior. Just conversations that flowed without friction. People asked me questions directly. They listened. They remembered things I had mentioned last time. It was normal. That normality made the past feel heavier. At one point, my brother stepped into the kitchen while I was refilling my glass. He stood next to me and said it was good to have me there. His tone was neutral, almost formal. I said thanks. There was a lot he could have said then. There were openings. He did not take them. Later that night, his wife asked me if I wanted to see the backyard. She pointed out small changes they had made since the last time I was there. She spoke easily, like this was how things should have been all along. I agreed, but inside I felt the weight of what it had taken to reach something so simple. On the drive home, I realized something uncomfortable. If I had never shown up to that party, none of this would have shifted. The version of me that existed in their world would still be the controlled one. Quiet, convenient, abstract. That meant the correction had required my presence, not my patience. A few days later, my brother called again. This time, he did not dance around things as much. He said the dinner went well. He said people liked me. He said it felt less tense than he expected. I asked him why he expected tension. He paused, then said change always feels risky. I asked whose risk he had been managing all these years. He did not answer right away. He said when he married into that family, everything felt scrutinized. How he spoke, where he came from, what his family was like. He said he felt pressure to present something clean and uncomplicated. I asked where I fit into that. He said he did not know how to place me without opening doors. He was not ready to walk through. That answer was honest, in a limited way. I told him something I had been holding back. I said being talked about was not the same as being included. I said stories flatten people, even kind ones. I said deciding on my behalf that I would rather be distant had taken away my choice. He listened. He did not interrupt. He said he was sorry. It was the first time he said that without qualifiers. I did not respond with forgiveness. I did not need to. An apology does not erase impact, it just names it. After that, we entered a strange middle phase. He tried, in small ways, looping me into plans earlier, asking my opinion, checking instead of assuming. None of it was dramatic. It felt careful, like someone learning a new habit. I appreciated the effort, but I stayed alert. Trust does not come back all at once. It returns in pieces, if at all. What I noticed most was how others treated me once the framing changed. No one questioned my presence anymore. No one spoke around me. I was no longer an idea they had to reconcile with reality. That shift did not come from confrontation. It came from visibility. And that made me think about all the times in my life I had stayed quiet to keep things smooth, not realizing that smoothness often benefits the person doing the managing, not the one being managed. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. It moved in small adjustments that only made sense if you were paying attention. After that conversation with my brother, there was a stretch of time where nothing visibly went wrong. That might sound reassuring, but it was actually uncomfortable. I had learned not to trust calm that arrived without clarity. The next pressure point came from outside him. A distant relative on his wife's side reached out to me directly. Not someone I knew well, not someone who owed me anything. She sent a short message saying she had enjoyed talking to me and hoped we could stay in touch. That should have been harmless, but it told me something important. It meant people no longer felt they needed him as the filter. I did not respond right away. I sat with it for a few hours, noticing the tension in my body. Part of me worried that answering would somehow trigger another quiet correction behind the scenes. Another part of me was tired of acting like connection was something dangerous. I replied politely. Nothing exploded. No one called to ask why I was talking to whom. No one tried to reframe it. The silence that followed was different, not permission this time. Acceptance. That was when I realized control only works if everyone agrees to it. A week later, my brother asked if I wanted to join him and his wife for lunch. Just the three of us. That was new. No buffer. No audience. We met at a place near his office, neutral, familiar enough for him to feel grounded. The conversation stayed light at first. Work, schedules, small updates. Then his wife said something that shifted the tone. She said she was glad things felt more open lately. She looked at both of us when she said it. My brother nodded but did not speak. I took a breath and said I was glad too, but that open and easy were not the same thing. I said things felt better because we were no longer pretending nothing had happened. That landed heavier than I intended. My brother asked what pretending I meant. I told him the truth. I said we had spent years acting like distance was natural, when it was actually constructed. I said I needed him to acknowledge that difference if we were going to move forward honestly. He stared at the table for a moment. Then he said something I did not expect. He said part of him thought he was protecting me. I asked how. He said he worried his wife's family would judge me unfairly, that they would reduce me to details that were none of their business. He said he thought keeping me abstract spared me from that. I told him being erased is not protection. His wife nodded slowly. She said people judge anyway. She said not being present just means you do not get to answer for yourself. That felt like validation, but I did not lean into it. Outsider validation matters less when the core issue is trust. The lunch ended without resolution. No raised voices. No dramatic statements. just an understanding that we were not done talking, even if we did not know how to continue yet. After that, I noticed something else. When my name came up in conversations around extended family, no one looked to my brother for confirmation anymore. They looked at me. They waited for my answer. That shift created a subtle discomfort for him. He never said it outright, but I could see it in the way he hovered during group conversations, then stepped back. In the way he sometimes tried to finish my sentence. Ease and caught himself. I did not correct him publicly. I let him adjust. One evening he called me unexpectedly. He said he had been thinking about something I said earlier, about being included versus being spoken about. He said it made him realize how often he had simplified people to manage situations. I asked if he included himself in that group. He said yes, that mattered. He said marriage had made him hyper-aware of perception. He said once you realize how much people infer from small details, it is hard to stop managing the picture. I told him that constant management comes at a cost. He agreed, but agreement does not equal change. What followed was a period of inconsistency. Some days felt normal, others felt like old patterns resurfacing. Invitations that came late, information that arrived after decisions were already made. Each time it happened, I felt the familiar urge to smooth it over, and each time I resisted. I did not lash out. I did not withdraw completely. I simply named it when it happened. Briefly, calmly, without accusation. That took more energy than I expected. Standing your ground quietly is harder than making a scene. Over time, the pattern became clear. When I named things, they improved. When I stayed silent, they slipped. That told me everything I needed to know about what would happen next. Not because I was pessimistic, but because I had learned how my brother operated under pressure. He adjusted just enough to keep things from breaking, but not enough to feel exposed. That pattern became clearer the longer I stayed present. The next shift came through something small again. A family event was planned on his wife's side, not hosted by him this time. Someone else sent the invitation. It included me by default. No side message, no warning. Just my name on the list like it had always belonged there. I stared at the message longer than I should have. This was new territory. I did not ask my brother about it. That was intentional. In the past, checking in would have given him the chance to reframe or soften or manage expectations. I wanted to see what happened when I simply showed up as planned. When I arrived, no one acted surprised. That might sound small, but it mattered more than anything else so far. People greeted me naturally. They asked how I was. They referenced previous conversations. No one treated my presence like an exception or a courtesy. I was just there. I noticed my brother almost immediately. He looked caught between relief and unease. He smiled. He hugged me. He said he was glad I came. But he also hovered for a while, staying within earshot, watching how conversations unfolded. I let them unfold. At one point, someone asked me a direct question about a family matter my brother usually answered on behalf of everyone. I answered honestly without checking his reaction first. He stiffened, then relaxed. That moment told me more than a long conversation would have. Later, when we were alone for a minute, he asked if I felt comfortable. I said yes. He nodded, like he was filing that away. What he did not say was just as important. He did not ask me to be careful. He did not suggest topics to avoid. He did not warn me about anyone's opinions. That silence felt different from earlier silences. It felt like relinquishing something. Not fully, but partially. After that event, things shifted again, unevenly. Some weeks he was more open than he had ever been. He shared updates. He included me early. He asked instead of assumed. Other weeks he slipped. Plans would form without me. Information would arrive late. Old habits resurfaced when he was stressed or busy. Each time I made a decision. If it was small, I let it go. If it affected me directly, I named it, not emotionally, not dramatically, just factually. That approach changed the dynamic more than I expected. He stopped defending himself as much. He started asking follow-up questions, not ALW's, but more often than before. Sometimes he admitted he did not even realize he was doing it again. I believed him. Patterns can exist without malice. But that does not make their impact smaller. The hardest moment came when he tried to joke about the past. We were sitting together after dinner one night, scrolling through old photos on his phone. He laughed and said something like, "Guess we really kept you mysterious for a while." He said it lightly. Like a shared joke. I did not laugh. I told him quietly that it had not felt mysterious from my side. It had felt like absence without explanation. He looked embarrassed, then defensive, then tired. He said he did not know how else to handle things back then. I told him I understood that. I also told him understanding does not mean minimizing. That landed. After that, he stopped making jokes about it. What I realized during this phase was that repair does not come from grand gestures. It comes from sustained discomfort. From staying in conversations that would be easier to avoid. From resisting the urge to smooth things over just to keep peace. I was changing too. I was less willing to accept vague answers, less willing to disappear, to make others comfortable. Not in an aggressive way, just in a grounded one. And people noticed, not just my brother. His wife. Her family. Even extended relatives who had no stake in the original dynamic. They treated me differently. Now. Not because they learned new facts about me, but because I stopped participating in my own erasure. That realization stayed with me. It also made one thing very clear. This chapter was not about reconciliation, it was about recalibration. And that process was not finished yet. That was an adjustment for me. Before all this, closeness was the goal, being included, being looped in, being part of things without friction. Now I realized those were outcomes, not foundations. What mattered more was whether my presence required negotiation. The answer was changing, not everywhere, not all the time, but enough to matter. The clearest moment came during a conversation that had nothing to do with me. We were sitting together, my brother, his wife, and a few others, talking about a future plan. Something months away. Dates were being floated, logistics discussed. For a while I just listened. Then someone asked what I thought, not out of politeness, out of necessity. My input affected the plan. I answered without hesitation. No one questioned it, no one redirected. No one looked to my brother to confirm or soften what I said. He noticed. Later, when we were alone, he said it felt different now. He said conversations moved differently when I was in the room. I asked him what he meant. He said he could no longer control the narrative pace. Things unfolded in real time. Opinions surfaced before he could arrange them. I said that was what participation looked like. He nodded. He did not argue. That was new. Still, I stayed realistic. This was not a redemption arc. There were no sweeping apologies or emotional breakthroughs. Just gradual shifts that required consistency to hold. And consistency is harder than intention. I noticed how easily old habits tried to resurface under stress. Busy weeks, family pressure, moments where control felt comforting again. Each time the difference was that I no longer disappeared quietly. I stayed visible. Not loudly. Not defensively. Just present. That presence became a boundary on its own. What surprised me most was how little explanation it required. I'd spent years thinking I needed the right words, the right moment, the right framing to correct things. In reality, showing up without apology did more than any conversation could. The story adjusted around me. Near the end of that period, my brother said something that stuck with me. He said he used to think managing family dynamics meant preventing discomfort. He said now he realized it most. Lie meant deciding who carried it. I did not respond right away. Then I told him I had carried more than my share. He did not deny it. That acknowledgement mattered more than an apology would have at that point. By the time Chapter 2 closed, the situation had not resolved neatly. There were still gaps, still caution, still moments where I had to check whether inclusion was genuine or just convenient. But there was clarity. I knew where I stood. I was no longer a concept that needed framing. I was a person with direct access, with my own voice, with the right to be present without explanation. And once that line was crossed, it could not be uncrossed. Whatever happened next would build on that foundation. Not on stories, not on silence, but on reality. That surprised me. After everything that had shifted, I expected some kind of reaction. A pullback, a recalibration from my brother, maybe even quiet resentment. Instead, what I got was something more subtle. Distance without disappearance. Weeks went by where we spoke less, but when we did it felt cleaner. No circling, no hidden checks. No vague language meant to keep things flexible. If he invited me somewhere, the invitation was clear. If he did not dress it up as timing or convenience. At first that felt like loss. Then it started to feel like honesty. The real turning point came from someone I did not expect. His father-in-law called me one afternoon. No build-up, no apology tour, just a straightforward call. He said he had been thinking about something since the party months earlier and wanted to ask me directly instead of assuming. That alone told me how far things had shifted. He asked if I ever felt intentionally kept at a distance in the early years. I did not rush to answer. I said yes, but I also said I did not think it was done out of cruelty. I said I thought it came from fear and overmanagement rather than rejection. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that aligned with what he had observed. He said my brother had always been careful about how he presented things, that he polished stories before letting them out, that it worked in professional spaces but sometimes spilled into personal ones. He said meeting me directly changed how he understood that. Not because I contradicted anything negative, but because I existed outside the frame my brother had built. That mattered. What struck me most was how calm the conversation felt. No defensiveness, no need to convince. Just two people aligning on reality after enough time had passed. After that call, I noticed my brother pulling back slightly again, not cutting me off, just reducing contact. Fewer messages, fewer updates. This time, I did not chase it. That was the difference. I let the space sit. I watched how it felt in my body. Less anxious than before. Less self-questioning. The absence no longer triggered the same spiral because I was no longer trying to earn re-entry. I already had access. That access did not depend on frequency. A month later, we ran into each other at a larger gathering. One neither of us controlled. No hosting, no lists. Just family overlapping in a shared space. He greeted me warmly. No tension, no awkwardness. We talked like people who knew each other well but did not need to prove it. At one point, someone asked a question that touched on old territory. Something that would have prompted my brother to step in and manage the answer. He did not. He looked at me and waited. I answered for myself. That moment felt bigger than it looked. Not because of what was said, but because of what was not interrupted. Later, he told me he noticed that. He said it was easier now to let things be what they were. He said the effort of constant framing had been exhausting in ways he did not fully understand until he stopped doing it. I asked him why he stopped. He said because it stopped working. He said once people met me, the story no longer held the same power. He could not put it back in the box without looking dishonest. That was not an apology, but it was accountability. What changed next was not closeness, but respect. He stopped assuming my availability. He asked instead of informing. He shared information without deciding first whether it was relevant to me. Those sound like small things. They are not. They are the difference between being managed and being regarded. I also changed how I showed up. I did not over-explain my choices. I did not justify why I attended some things and skipped others. I trusted that my boundaries did not need narration. That confidence surprised people. It surprised me too. There was one moment near the end of this phase that stayed with me. His wife say, almost offhandedly, that it felt like the family had finally settled into something real. Not perfect, not seamless, but real. She said it like an observation, not a conclusion. I agreed, because what we had now was not harmony, it was alignment. And that only happened once the story stopped being controlled and started being shared. After that point, things stopped shifting outward and started settling inward. What I mean is, the big visible changes had already happened. People knew me. I was no longer filtered. My presence no longer needed explanation. What remained was quieter and harder to track. It was about how I carried myself in the aftermath. I noticed I was less alert around my brother. Not guarded exactly, but no longer scanning for what might be happening beneath the surface. That vigilance had taken more energy than I realized. Letting it go felt unfamiliar at first, almost irresponsible, like I was missing something. But nothing bad happened. We went weeks without talking, and it did not feel like punishment or distance. It felt like two adults occupying their own lives without the need to constantly check alignment. When we did speak, it was direct. Short sometimes. Unremarkable in a way that felt earned. I stopped measuring the relationship by how often he reached out. That was a big shift for me. Before, silence meant something was wrong. Now it just meant silence. The next real moment came during a family discussion that had nothing to do with history or hurt. It was practical. Logistics. A future plan that required coordination across multiple people. I was included from the beginning, not as an afterthought, not as a courtesy. From the first message, that inclusion landed differently than the earlier ones. It did not feel like a correction. It felt like a baseline. My brother contributed without directing, without shaping, without translating. He let others respond to me directly, even when opinions differed. There was disagreement, no one rushed to smooth it over. That told me more than agreement ever could. Later, when it was just the two of us, he said something simple. He said it felt easier now that he was not constantly thinking 3 steps ahead. I asked what he meant. He said he used to anticipate reactions before they happened. He said he would imagine how people might interpret things and adjust in advance. He said it felt responsible at the time. I asked when it stopped feeling responsible. He said when he realized he was spending more energy managing perception than building connection, that was one of the few moments where I felt something soften between us, not because it fixed the past, but because it named the cost of it. Still, I stayed careful. I did not rush to restore what had been lost. I did not assume that clarity meant permanence. Patterns can reappear when pressure returns. I knew that what I did instead was watch consistency. Weeks passed. Then months, no backsliding, not perfect behavior. Just reliable behavior. That mattered. I also noticed something else. I was no longer the only one adjusting. My brother's wife began checking in directly, not about plans, but about opinions. Her family did the same. They did not defer, they did not triangulate. They treated me like someone whose presence did not need explanation. That kind of acceptance feels quiet when it is real. It does not announce itself. It just stays. One evening, after a long day, my brother and I ended up talking about something unrelated. Work stress, expectations, the way people build identities around how they are perceived. At one point, he said something that surprised both of us. He said he did not realize how much of himself he had hidden along with me. I asked what he meant. He said managing the story meant managing himself too. He said he had become smaller in certain ways to keep things controlled, more cautious, more curated. He said letting go of that felt risky but also lighter. I did not respond with advice. I did not need to. That was his realization to hold. What I understood then was this. Being hidden had never been about me being too much. It had been about him being afraid of being fully seen. Once I grasped that, the last bit of resentment I was carrying loosened its grip. Not disappeared. Loosened. That was enough. By the time we reached that stage, the story stopped being about access. It became about responsibility. Not his responsibility toward me, or mine toward him, but the responsibility that comes with being known. Once people see you clearly, you cannot pretend your choices only affect you. That truth settled slowly into the background of everything. The next moment that mattered came from a place I had not expected to revisit. Someone from his wife's family mentioned an old story my brother used to tell about me, a harmless one, childhood stuff. It came up casually, without intent. They laughed. I smiled, then they added a detail that was not true, not malicious, just wrong. For a split second, I waited for my brother to correct it. Out of habit, out of old muscle memory. He did not, so I did. Calmly, briefly. I said that part was not quite how it happened. I clarified. Then I moved on. No one reacted strongly. No one questioned me. The conversation adjusted and continued. That moment stayed with me. In the past, I would have let the incorrect version stand to keep things smooth. Or my brother would have stepped in and shaped it himself. This time, neither happened. I handled my own narrative. Later, when we were alone, my brother said he noticed that. He said it felt strange not to intervene. I asked him why. He said he realized how often he used stories as a buffer. Not just for me, for himself. He said stepping back forced him to tolerate small amounts of discomfort. He used to smooth over automatically. I told him that discomfort was not new. It was just redistributed. He did not disagree. That was when I understood something important. The dynamic had not changed because he became more considerate. It changed because I stopped outsourcing my presence. That is not something you negotiate. It is something you claim. From then on, I paid attention to how often I almost slipped back into old habits. Downplaying myself, deferring answers, waiting for cues before speaking. Each time I noticed it, I corrected course quietly. No announcement, no explanation, just adjustment. That consistency changed how others interacted with me too. They stopped checking for permission. They stopped framing questions indirectly. They treated me like someone who was stable in their position. Stability invites respect. One afternoon, my brother said something that felt like a closing of a loop. He said he had been thinking about why he felt the need to manage things so tightly in the beginning. He said marrying into a family with strong expectations made him afraid of being misread. He said instead of letting people misunderstand him and correcting it over time, he tried to preempt everything. I asked him what he would do differently now. He said he would let people form their own impressions, even if that meant some of them would be wrong at first. I nodded. That was the entire lesson distilled. You cannot control misunderstanding without controlling people. And once you cross that line, you lose something more valuable than approval. I did not say that out loud. He was already there. By this point, the relationship between us was not close in the way it once was. It was quieter, more contained. But it was also more honest. There were fewer assumptions, fewer silent expectations. I trusted that what was said was what was meant. That trust did not come from words. It came from repetition. Time passed, nothing dramatic happened. And that, in its own way, felt like resolution. Not the kind that wraps things up neatly, but the kind that lets life move forward without dragging the past behind it. I could live with that. That might sound strange, because not everything had been resolved. But resolution and closure are not the same thing. I was no longer waiting for something to be fixed. I had already adjusted. The last shift did not come from my brother or his wife or anyone in that family. It came from me, in a moment so ordinary it almost slipped past unnoticed. I was invited to something I could not attend, not because I was excluded, not because the timing was bad. I simply did not want to go. For a second, I felt the old instinct rise up, the need to explain, to soften it, to make sure no one misread my absence. Then I stopped. I declined politely. No extra context, no justification. Nothing happened. No follow-up questions, no reinterpretation, no quiet reshaping of the story to explain where I was. That was it. That was the moment I knew things had truly changed. Absence no longer required narrative. Later, my brother mentioned it casually. He asked if everything was okay. I said yes, I just had other plans. He accepted that, not because he was trying to be understanding, but because he no longer needed my presence to mean something specific that felt like freedom. Looking back, the hardest part of this entire experience was realizing how easily people you trust can reshape you without ever lying outright. By omission, by framing, by deciding what parts of you are convenient to present. It rarely comes from cruelty. It comes from fear of judgment, fear of complexity, fear of losing control over how things look. Understanding that helped me let go of the need to be angry, but it did not make me forget. I learned to pay attention to patterns instead of promises, to notice who needs you simplified in order to feel comfortable, to recognize when inclusion comes with conditions you never agreed to. Most of all, I learned that being known is not something someone else grants you, it is something you allow. My relationship with my brother did not return to what it once was. It became something else, more bounded, more deliberate, less automatic, and that was okay. What we have now is honest. We show up where we choose to, we speak directly, we do not manage each other's image anymore. That might not look like closeness from the outside, but it feels like respect, and respect, I have learned, lasts longer than any carefully curated story.